Welcome to Prescribing Possibility, conversations that inspire us to heal, grow, and live with harmony. I'm your host, Dr. Dimtna Weil. Thanks for joining me for your weekly dose of thoughtful conversation and personal transformation. Let's get started.
Before we start, today's episode touches on eating patterns, body image, some past trauma. And if that's not what you need to hear right now and it doesn't serve you, please feel free to skip this one and come back another time. Thanks again for coming back to the Prescribing Possibility podcast. If you've ever found yourself eating when you're not hungry, stuck in a cycle of restriction or overeating, or just been exhausted from a decade or more of diets that didn't stick, today's conversation's for you. My guest is Stephanie Mara. She holds a master's degree in somatic psychotherapy. She's a certified eating psychology coach and a practitioner that has created Somatic Eating. It's a body-based approach that reframes disordered eating patterns as the nervous system's attempt to feel safe, not a character flaw. She's also the host of the Satiated podcast, and for over 10 years, she's been helping people worldwide reconnect with their bodies around food. I wanted this conversation to go beyond the usual talking points because I think what Stephanie's doing is a very different approach than what has been seen and heard in in our culture. And so we're going to dig into the actual mechanisms behind her method. We're going to touch on where the science stands, and I'm going to just say from the get-go, part of what we're going to unpack is what it means that our nervous system is trying to keep us safe. It's a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy and that it serves. Please welcome Stephanie. Welcome back to the Prescribing Possibility podcast. Dimtna Weil here, and today we are joined by Stephanie Mara, who's the creator of Somatic Eating, and we're going to have a nice conversation about attachment and safety and the relationship that percolate under the surface with our relationship with food. So I'd love to welcome you. Thank you for being here, Stephanie.
Oh, I'm really thrilled to connect with you today and to chat with you and your listeners.
Thank you. So for those in the audience who may not have heard of somatic eating, I think it's a very descriptive and brilliant title, by the way. Not that you need me to tell you that, but I'm curious if you could just speak to what it is and how you came about this program.
Yeah, so somatic eating is my trademarked work that I feel like, well, I could say it comes from my 2 decades worth in private practice. I feel like it's also a compilation of my entire life's experience of also navigating trauma and food and body image struggles. And so I would say this probably all started in my early 20s when I started getting digestive issues, symptoms, and didn't really know what was going on. Ended up getting a colonoscopy and endoscopy done because digestive diseases run in my family, and just to rule everything out. And they didn't find anything. And they were like, just watch your triggers, and sent me on my way. And I was like, what? That's it.
That's not helpful. Thank you.
No. So me being the curious person that I am, really started exploring digestive health, nutrition. And at that point in time, I had gone on my first diet when I was 13 years old. The only thing that I knew how to do was diet. I didn't actually know how to eat, like how to even be an eater, what my body even needed. So I first got fascinated with nutrition, took some certifications, started studying different nutritional modalities. And through that time, also found yoga, which is like home in my body now, which, I can just get on my mat and I just feels like I'm transported to like this safe space. So while learning about yoga and the mind-body connection, I also learned about yoga sister science, Ayurveda, started getting curious about that nutritional modality. But the more I got into learning about nutrition and starting to find a place where I could feed my body well, understood what my body needed, and get out of diet culture, what I was hit with was this profound realization after many, many, many years of lots of explorations was that really all of my digestive issues and my past food behaviors, even my body image struggles, were all a response to past trauma. And that took a really long time to hit upon. And it wasn't until I went through my master's degree in somatic psychotherapy that I really started to discover how much our food behaviors are treated as this pathologizing thing. Like the food is the problem. Your relationship with food is the issue. And what I've seen over the years and also in my private practice was it was the wisest, most adaptive thing we could have done at any point in time. So growing up around a lot of situations that didn't ultimately make me feel safe, going on a diet and focusing so heavily on my body image was a lifesaver for me at 13 years old because it distracted me and it gave me something that I could feel a sense of control around and to produce a sense of safety in my body. And I've seen this now over and over and over again for a lot of other individuals as well, that it's not really about the food. And the more that we focus on that this is a food issue, the further you get away from yourself of like what's actually going on here. And so what I found also through starting to blend trauma work and then nutrition and then nervous system work and attachment, that is kind of where somatic eating came out of. In the main question that I'm asking in my work, somatic eating, is what is your food or body image behaviors trying to communicate from your body? And if we can see that it can be insecure attachment, it could be nutritional deficiencies, it could be a trauma response, it could be nervous system dysregulation, overarching a lack of safety. And then we get to actually start to work with the core of what's been fueling the food and body image behaviors rather than continuing to stay at like the tip of the iceberg or the surface level concern.
Right. Well, that you've said a lot, and I just want to maybe just stick a pin in it for just a moment so that we can maybe just backtrack a tiny bit. I found that work very interesting on a lot of different levels. I guess from what I'm hearing, and people out there are probably like, huh, somatic eating. So somatic being felt within the body. We're talking like interoception,
Yeah, if we
right?
see the word somatic is relating to the body, distinct from the mind. So yeah.
Right. So, because I think that word is out there an awful lot and maybe not always used um, correctly. And so that's why I want to make sure that our listeners are kind of, we're all on the same page as we start the conversation. So what the first thing that comes to mind is the idea that it's not about the food, right? And that these things that have occurred in our lives, like we are learning so much about, come back to things that occurred when we were younger, or perhaps they were driven by circumstances at that time. And I think it's important too to like mention, these are things that happen innately. Like it's not as though somebody decided they were going to take care of you know, their attachment issues or
Mhm.
sense of, I think these are it's interesting. There are so many different conversations around disordered eating and food that I think it's really important. There's a lot of like victim blaming or patient blaming that I think it's important to mention. As you said, that it's not something that people are choosing to do. This is
No.
just right. It's like a reflective thing. As time has gone on, people are like, huh, maybe it's not about the food, and explored that. Am I getting that right? Tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah, yeah. First off, Yes, around just the term somatic eating is it's eating with relating to the body rather than eating from relating from your mind. What you should eat, what you should do, what's the right combination of foods, but more like, oh, there is a embodied experience that you're having with food. And even when I say it's not about the food, sometimes people are like, oh, but I really don't feel like I can like quote unquote control myself around XYZ food. Sometimes it's more about what's happening inside of your body when you eat a particular food or have an experience with a food that you don't want to end, that even that is more of a somatic experience of, oh, there's a lot of intensity happening in my body, and maybe capacity is low to be with that. So, yeah, that's what I'm talking about of somatic eating is it's what is happening inside of your body. And then even how does that felt sense feel familiar of something in the past?
Yeah, that is actually so fascinating. The idea that, like, this, you were talking before, like, just when we started about sensing the nervous system, right? And I guess what is it that somebody is physically noticing in these instances? Like, is it their heart rate or their tension in their muscles or breath? Like, could you walk me through and the listeners through like an example of what that is?
Yeah. So I remember the first time that I started to sit with the urge to binge and not do it. And I won't ever forget this moment because I think it was one of those profound experiences where I actually started to slow down and be with my body. And what does it feel like to have such an intense urge to do something and not act on it? So, in the moment, what I can remember is a lot of intensity and tension in my chest. My breath was shallow. I literally wanted to crawl out of my skin. It was so uncomfortable because for years I had spent away from my body doing everything I could to keep a distance from my body because there was so much intense pain and sadness and despair and things I had to process that it was just too much to be with. So as I started to, at the time, going through my master's degree, everyone had to also be working with a somatic therapist as well. So you're like doing it yourself and then you're working with a somatic therapist. I always like to describe the experience of like they rip your heart out of your chest so you can look at it and then do the same for others. Because it was very intense experience to
I
go
bet.
through.
Yeah.
But in that, I started to really realize how much of a distance I was having from my body. And sometimes when we hear the concept or the phrase of like sit with it, we have this idea we're just supposed to be like sitting Buddha style, being like, I'm just going to feel this intensity. And in a more somatic perspective, I think of it as moving through something. And at the time, the only way to move with that amount of intensity was to continue to keep my body in movement. So there was so much happening inside of me that I started to turn on music and dance with it. I started to take really long walks with it. I started just to give it a voice and expression that was nonverbal. So it didn't have to make sense why my body wanted to move a particular way or why it needed to keep moving. I understand now that it was a sympathetic nervous system response of fight or flight that needed to be expressed of like, you can get away from this. You have choice here. And sometimes food was a way to get away from something. Like if we think about as kids, if your kitchen was open and available to you, I know for some people it maybe wasn't, but if it was open and available to you and there was fighting or yelling or screaming or uncomfortable situations, you could walk into the kitchen and grab a cookie and be transported into something entirely different in your body so quickly. And so I never like to see that with a sense of shame or guilt or judgment because like what a wise thing for you to do as a kid to find something that was going to get you through that experience. But the amount of discomfort that was there never got expression. And so that's where it builds and it builds and it builds. And sometimes things like food behaviors like binge eating are the release valve where you feel a little bit better for a period of time. But then it just starts building up again because everything that your body is holding onto has never been felt and expressed.
So I'm curious, I can't help but get away from like my training in medicine. And I'm curious, like the on the background level, right? In terms of, I think medicine has largely ignored these like disordered eating for a long time, and so not as much is known about it as we might think, right?
Yeah.
And
Bin-
so yeah,
Binge eating
binging.
disorder wasn't
Mhm.
added into the DSM until 2013. That
I mean,
wasn't that
that's
long ago.
no, that's unbelievable,
Yeah.
actually. And so I guess my question is, because there are different pieces and components here that we're talking about that kind of led to somatic eating, you know, what, how does I guess, is there literature or research that kind of supports this work, or is it still an area that has a lot of research that needs to be done? I'm curious to see like are we lined up, or are we like still so far behind in our understanding?
Yeah. So everything that I have combined there is research out there around it. So, first, if we see that there is a ton of research that shows that food behaviors are a response to trauma, that usually what we have seen is that individuals who are navigating, I don't love to use the term disordered eating and eating disorder anymore because of the
Hmm.
term disorder when it was the
Yeah.
most ordered adaptive thing you could do. So again, there's a lot of pathologizing language within the field that I'm also just trying to update so that people can really understand that this was a smart choice in the moment, but is causing harm long term. So we can start to maybe decrease the shame, because research also shows that shame is one of the biggest contributors to having food behaviors continue. You feel shame, you feel awful in your body, you go, you eat food to feel better, you feel more shame, and the cycle repeats itself. So, as much as we can decrease the shame around whatever you've been navigating with food is really, really, really supportive to step into a place of compassion and curiosity.
Yeah. And so just on that note, so then how does like addiction fall into this? Like, where is that in this schema?
So, one of my colleagues actually just published a new article in a research journal that is talking about how much more nuance we need in this field, and we haven't had it. And so, there's basically like kind of two sides that have been created. One is the all foods fit, you have to eat everything to habituate to the food. And then there's the other side that's like, you're addicted to food, you need to treat it like an addiction, and you need to cut out all of these things. And this has not worked for thousands and thousands of people.
I was gonna say for anybody, almost anybody, right? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to say that it can't work for some people out there. I know some people who've done food habituation and it certainly worked for them. They maybe had to go through a, huge leap there of like having a lot of uncomfortable situations with food. But what I've seen in my work is that neither sides have actually accommodated the people who have come to me. And so I don't like to see it as an addiction, and I don't like to see it as all foods fit either, because that puts us into a lack of nuance and not meeting the individual with where they're at and what they need based off of their body. And that's where I feel like the nervous system work comes in, is what I usually am finding myself teaching people is getting to know how their body is telling them what nervous system state they're in, so that they can make food decisions based off of the awareness of knowing where their body is at. So I can give an example of that, of let's say you're trying to decide, should I eat the cookie or not? It's not about the cookie. But let's say you're trying to decide, should I eat even fill in the blank food? And in the moment, if we start to note, okay, where is my nervous system at right now? Okay, if you're in a sympathetic nervous system or you're in a fight or flight response, your prefrontal cortex is a little shut down. Your blood is moved away from your digestive tract, so to your limbs, so you can fight or flee. So it's going to be harder to digest food in general. And your dopamine levels are probably lower. So now you go, you eat that cookie. You're like, well, I should eat the cookie. I deserve the cookie. I'm not dieting. I should prove my recovery by eating the cookie. Your body in that state, in that place in your brain and your nervous system, you're never going to want to stop eating cookies. So in the moment, you can be like, wow, I'm not feeling safe. I'm in a fight or flight response. If I ate this cookie right now, I don't know if I would be able to navigate what comes up afterwards. And not saying it's impossible, but sometimes as we do some of this somatic work to build capacity to be with intensity, you might choose, I want to eat this cookie and knowing my heart rate's going to go up. I'm going to feel a little panicked. I might feel some anxiety. I'm going to want to eat more. And could I sit with that experience? Not make it try to go away, not try to solve it or fix it, or even think that eating another cookie is the answer to it, but be like, okay, I'm going to eat this cookie knowing I'm going to be maybe navigating some intensity afterwards. Then we also get the situation where like, you're out with your best friends and you want to get ice cream with them and you're feeling calm and you've been laughing all night and you're in your parasympathetic nervous system of safety and connection. Your digestion is totally turned on. You're getting co-regulation from the people around you. You're like, yeah, I could totally navigate eating some ice cream right now in the context of this situation and where my nervous system and my brain is at, because my prefrontal cortex is also more online. That even if I wanted more, I would be able to rationalize, yeah, that was really yummy, but I'm noticing my body's also full. I'm going to choose not to eat more right now, knowing I can eat more ice cream later if I want to. So that's where nervous system work, I feel like, is really powerful, because once you know what's happening inside of you, then you can make aligned decisions of what does my body actually need? What is its capacity to navigate different food interactions? And what kind of experience am I looking for to have in my body?
So interesting. And so how, I guess, are patients or clients or people selecting themselves to do this work? Like, how do they come to you? I mean, I'm sure in a lot of different ways, but how do they come upon this as a way of navigating their own discomfort around body image or food?
Most people find me, one, that they feel like they've tried every binge eating modality that is literally out there and feel like nothing has absolutely worked. And that's why I found for myself the somatic work was a missing piece in my own journey. And it has been for hundreds of people that I've worked with now. So there's that piece. And I think the other piece is that I've been talking more and more about, I feel like intuitive eating has become this gold star of food recovery. And again, I am not putting any modality down that is out there. It has worked for hundreds of people. Intuitive eating has tons of research backing it and how effective it's been. It's been a very important modality to be created to move the field along. But with any time we create something new, there are gaps. And so I have felt like over the years, intuitive eating didn't work for me, just with my brain and my body and the way that I work and my history. And I think really starting to own that of like, this doesn't work for some people based off of if you have a history of past trauma or navigating a neurodivergent brain, this isn't a modality that's potentially going to resonate with your food recovery journey. And so that's where I've been putting that out more. And I think people have been really intrigued by that because I feel like there are a lot of people who have also tried intuitive eating and felt like they failed. They were like, oh, if intuitive eating doesn't work for me, then I'm hopeless. Nothing's going to work for me. And so I think a lot of people have found me that way where I'm like, no, you're not hopeless. This is just one modality out of all the modalities out there in food recovery. And this one didn't work for you based off of what you're navigating in your body.
Right. So most of the clients then would have been people who have tried a lot of different things by the time they have come your way. And so that's interesting. So do you find that do they come to you hopeful, or do they come to you more like, I don't know, distressed or despaired, right? Like it's,
Both.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm curious though, because it's such, whether or not there's a diagnosis attached, I think there are a lot of people who find themselves maybe in this situation, even if they don't have a DSM or any kind of a code attached to it, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'm just curious, like, how do you navigate the differences of how people are presenting to you?
Yeah, well, first off, we need to kind of assess how many, like, I call it like food trauma experiences, but how many potential food traumatic experiences and body image experiences you have gone through, because it kind of increases sometimes the likelihood, kind of like adverse childhood experiences. The more we have of those, the more likelihood we're maybe going to have struggles later in life. The same thing can happen with food and body image experiences as well. The more we have these experiences, the more we may struggle also later in life as well. So sometimes I like to just assess that first of, how many of these experiences people have gone through where they grew up around diet culture. There were family members that were commenting on their body. There was really unsettling experiences that happened around food. They even got food sickness or food illness or had a food allergy when they were younger. All of these things can kind of like shape our interactions with food. And we don't take that often into account. Like, there's no class when I was going through becoming a therapist on our relationship with food. I had to go out and either piece that together myself or, take continuing education and create what I'm creating of what I wanted to see in this field that didn't exist. So many people come to a therapist talking sometimes about their relationship with food, and their therapists don't know how to navigate that because they've never been taught. So a lot of people also come to me, sometimes also being like, I still want to work with my therapist. And I'm like, great, that's totally fine. We can just focus on your relationship with food because it's a missing piece, and it does affect how we're navigating other areas of our life, because usually the way we are interacting with one thing can be the way we're interacting with many things. So I've seen for a lot of individuals, as they have started to create maybe a more stabilizing interactions with food, it starts to trickle into other areas where maybe, if we had to explore some work around setting boundaries, where maybe they always had to be a yes person growing up to keep themselves safe. So they had to say
Mm,
yes to everything.
mhm.
Then, they were saying yes to everything with food, not knowing that they could set boundaries or say no to food sometimes. So we want both options available, where I see this pendulum swing where people go into diet culture and they're saying no all the time to everything. And then they're sick of that, where they swing over to the other side of all foods fit. But then that's not listening to the body either, because then they're just being like, I'm just going to eat everything because that's what I'm supposed to, quote unquote, do, because anti-diet culture has told me that. But there's no lessons around, well, how do I know if this food resonates with my body? How do I know if this is an interaction with food that I want to have? Or is it based off of my past experiences? Or, I'm trying to navigate something internally that I don't know how to navigate yet. And the only way I've known how to do that is with food. So
Interesting.
there's a lot of layers there
Yeah.
of what I like to explore with someone initially, but I find that we first have to kind of get curious, is it just binge eating, or are you in binge restricting? Because if there's any kind of restricting happening, we actually have to explore the restriction first before we even get to the binge eating. But oftentimes the binge eating is the thing that causes the most panic, not the skipping of the meals and like under nutritioning your body. But if there's any sense of that happening, you're basically in biological fear that your body doesn't know if it's going to get enough food to exist. And eventually it's going to take over and urge you to eat more food. And at that point, I don't like to call it binge eating anymore. I like to call it protective eating. Your body is protecting you to make sure you stay alive.
So the language is so important around this. I think it's so interesting the way you have chosen, right, deliberately to use this a different way of describing things, because there is so much, I think, in medical culture as an OB, like everything was like putting blame on the patient. You have an incompetent cervix. Really? Or you're a gestational age. I mean, you're over 35 and now you're like, um, you're advanced maternal age and geriatric. I mean, stop. Right? Like it's prevalent. And I think my curiosity peaks around this topic, I think because of my work with women over the years and the fact that while men do have difficult relationships with food as well,
Absolutely.
and that can't be understated, right? That is a fact, but women do have we see them more commonly in women. And a lot of the guilt and the shame and the victim blaming, right? I feel like that does affect women disproportionately. And so I'm curious how that sits with you and what your thoughts are.
Absolutely. I do not like to, like I said earlier, pathologize this. I don't want to see it as the problem. Even some of the things that you'll see that I put on my websites is this was the answer, not the problem. This was an answer to a lack of safety, to nervous system dysregulation, to a trauma response, to insecure attachment. This was not the problem, and it never has been. And so, from like you were just describing, from again, this nervous system perspective, I always like to explain because people use I statements a lot. Why can't I get myself under control? Why can't I stop this food behavior? And I like to replace this with rather than like you aren't there anymore. By the time you get to the point of wanting to restrict or binge, usually you're in a survival response. So the you that you know, the prefrontal cortex you that can rationalize, think through your decisions, usually makes great decisions for yourself, feels calm and connected, that person's not there. You are now an animal being that is in survival. You're functioning from your amygdala. You are in a fight or flight, freeze, fawn, or what I like to call flop state. And you are just trying to survive. And in that, it doesn't have to make logical sense. And so it's like, okay, yeah, right now, like for example, we've been talking a lot about binge eating. Let's talk about skipping meals. You get an initial high from undernutritioning your body. Your body releases endorphins to protect you from the pain of not getting enough nutrition in your body. You're not doing that to yourself. Your body is doing that for you to protect you. And you remember what's going to help me feel empowered, what's going to help me feel in control, what's going to help me feel good. So initially, skipping breakfast, lunch, whatever, you get this high and then you feel really good. And you're just trying to quote unquote listen to your body. And you're like, but that makes me feel good. But then you're like, wait, but then in the afternoon I crash and I want all the sugar and I binge and all these other things. So you initially are doing something that what I think of is leading to short-term safety rather than long-term safety. So I don't want to diminish your experience that yes, initially it does feel good. I totally get why you're doing that behavior. But long-term, it isn't leading to the safety or stability that you're looking to have in your body. So we're not going to pathologize that. We're going to see the wisdom in it that you're trying to do the best you can to support and protect yourself. And I get curious about what's going to help you start to do that, where you get to feel that way all day long.
Say more about that.
Yeah. So this is where I find that a lot of this journey is what I like to call building your satiated life.
I did see that. I was going to ask you about that because I think that's an incredibly, I just love the phrase. So
Yeah.
please say more about that.
Yeah. So a lot of also like nervous system work these days is all talking about regulation. You have to regulate your nervous system. Well, I don't want to see your nervous system as broken. Your nervous system adapted to the environments that it needed to, and it can adapt to something else again. But it's not about just being a regulated human being. It's about being a human being that feels fully alive. And that sometimes means navigating hardship and showing up for yourself when things feel difficult and feeling the whole gamut of human emotions that we can feel, knowing that you can move through that and that emotions don't have to be perceived as dangerous. They're just potentially uncomfortable. So I see building a satiated life as where you are aware of all of your hungers as a human being, your cognitive hungers, your emotional hungers, your physical hungers, your spiritual hungers, and starting to satiate them in aligned ways. Because oftentimes these wires get crossed at a really young age, especially if you felt a sense of loneliness and emptiness and gnawing in your body, and nobody was there to help you figure out, oh, you maybe need a hug. But what was there for you was food. And so every time you feel this empty, gnawing feeling, you're like, oh, I must need food. And what we need to kind of somatically update is starting to get to know how different hungers feel in your body so you can identify, oh, physical hunger feels like this, where you might be surprised. I've had people say physical hunger feels like elbow pain. Feels like a headache's coming on, or feels like, you start getting a little confused, or like your words don't come as easily. So hunger is a very unique experience depending upon your interoceptive awareness and also like how your body speaks and communicates with you. But we get to know the difference between, well, what does emotional hunger feel like? When you actually need to talk to a friend or need a hug or need to, I don't know, go put your feet in grass.
Right.
Like that's a very different experience to have. And I find that once we start satiating our hungers in aligned ways, we feel more connected and alive in our body because we're listening to ourselves. We feel like we can trust ourselves. And this goes into the more interoceptive awareness we have, the easier decision makings become because we can hear and understand our body's feedback. It's kind of like sitting down to a really good friend to a cup of tea and they don't try to fix or solve anything, but they just listen to you and they want to be there for you. And you walk away like nothing has changed probably in the situations you were talking about with that friend, but you feel so much better. That's what I feel like this work is about, is the more that we are connected with ourselves, show up for ourselves, validate and acknowledge our experience and name what's happening, we just feel better. Even if we're
Yeah.
saying this is really hard right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's that name it to tame it, right? I mean, so much of what I find fascinating about as listening as you're describing it is, you know, um, it's almost like addressing. So it really is just addressing things at the root, right? Getting to the root of, maybe why we behave certain ways. And it might make sense for some people, it might not for others. And what I find fascinating is the way you were describing like the different kinds of hungers. Can you just speak to that a little more? I'm very interested in the disconnection and the reconnection of ourselves and becoming more connected and being able to hear ourselves and our intuition and that. So there's that alignment. And so I'm just curious, like, how do those things show up in those different areas of one's life?
Yeah. So are we talking about the embodied experience of them or the cognitive?
Oh, well, great question. I guess I'm trying to, what I'd love is to have listeners have a sense of what it's like. So you mentioned like feeling it in your elbow but but really like we can talk about something and walk away, nothing's different and feel better, right? But what is it that, from a spiritual perspective, like how does that present itself? I guess that's what I'm curious about, the presentation of these different aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, with physical hunger, it's going to show up unique to each person, like I was describing. Some of you may experience stomach gurgles. The way that I'd like to also describe, let's say, the difference between physical and emotional hunger is like physical hunger will grow very gradually. It's not very loud, it's not even very picky. Like, yes, we can know what our preferences are with food, but when it comes to physical hunger, usually it's just like, feed me anything. Like, if you've been so hungry and you're just like, I just need to find the closest store and like get something into my body, that's physical hunger. It's not picky, it's not choosy, it's not loud. It can get louder if we wait too long, but most of the time, it's like if you're in a meeting and you feel like a slight gnawing, you're like, okay, I can eat in 30 minutes. Like this meeting will be over soon. Like physical hunger can wait.
So that's like, I just want to interject. So that's like, you have even, I mean, children, I'm sure, are a totally different bag of things
Yes.
altogether.
Yes.
However, if you're really hungry and, you go for your kind of first line is to go, for the sugary things, right? You'll take a banana, you'll take an apple. Like when we start, like I used to notice this in little kids, right? Oh, you're hungry. Would you like an apple? Or, no, I want X, Y, or Z. Well, then you're not actually hungry. Because if you were hungry, you'd take the apple. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so then it's layered because then it's
Mm,
also our somatic memories around how different foods feel.
interesting. Okay.
So that's where physical hunger, I think, gets a little tricky, where sometimes we need to learn the difference between how different foods interact even with our nervous system, where there will be foods that upregulate us, stabilize us, or downregulate us. And so, depending upon also, this is where nervous system work comes in, our food impulses will change based off of what nervous system state we're in that we're choosing the food out of. So if
Okay.
I'm in a fight or flight response and I don't know that I'm there and I don't feel like I can get out of the fight or flight response, I have to stay in it. I'm going to choose a food that keeps me going. So that's your fifth, fourth, cup of coffee.
Right.
That's all of the sugary things because you're just like, I just have to keep going. But it's the sympathetic nervous system that's choosing that. And you also need food as well.
Got it. As opposed to rest and digest.
Yes. So then if we're
Hmm.
in the parasympathetic nervous system and we're like, I need food, yeah, we might feel more drawn to the apple because we don't feel this impulse from the nervous system of, but you have to keep going. So that's where also I like to do this nervous system work because it all gets to be your food, urges, and impulses and decisions and cravings are all body data because it all is informing you of potentially where your nervous system is at. So then if you stay in that fight or flight response all day and then you start choosing foods in the evening that collapse you, that's also just nervous system feedback of, wow, I've been keeping myself revved up all day. And now I'm utilizing food as a resource to help me collapse. But food can also be used in a way to help us stabilize so that we start to learn what I can know that I'm in a sympathetic response and actually utilize food to help me stabilize my blood sugar levels, give my cells what they need nutritionally, so that I start to feel more calm and more at peace within maybe the stress of the day.
Hone in on the point that not only do you provide therapy to patients, but your background in nutrition and understanding of this, it's it's such a fascinating combination that really I haven't come across before. And so I just want to acknowledge that. Like, it's really what you're talking about is really fascinating from the perspective of, a young woman who went through her own body image issues, who now has a teenage girl, right? Like, I'm thinking about all of the ways in which you kind of have merged your experience with your education to arrive at this place, and it's absolutely beautiful, honestly. Not that you need me to say that, but it really is, like, to take all of those things and to turn it into something where it removes a stigma and that, like, stickiness that kind of follows you around all the time and kind of just wipes away the shame, right? It, like, gently wipes away the shame and gives you a hug and says, "Okay, so this is what you're doing, and it's because of how you have learned to protect yourself. And there is another way you can do that moving forward, and this is how you can." And I think it's fascinating and it's brilliant, really. I'm curious, like, for clients that come to you, who doesn't this work for?
Yeah. I want to answer that question, but I want to finish answering your other
Yeah.
question
Sorry.
first.
I'm just like, this is so fascinating. I'm just like
No,
popping the questions out.
I love it. And I this is why I'm so passionate about this work and could
You can
probably
tell.
talk to you about it forever.
Yeah.
And so before I finish the difference between emotional hunger and physical hunger, just to kind of round that out so people can land that in their bodies, this is what I wish I had as a teenager. And what I would hope that any teenager listening or that their parents pass along to them are just like, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell any therapist I worked with. Like, I really ended up navigating a lot of my food behaviors by myself and figuring all this out along the way because there was so much shame and that, like, what I was doing was wrong. And so I would never want anyone to feel the way that I felt, knowing now that things really started to shift and change for me. Like, I would say it's been about 15 years or so since the last time I even had a binge eating experience or binge urge. And so I like to give hope that things can change. I've
Sure.
experienced it in my own body. And it was really starting to share with other people that made such a big difference. Actually starting to find people I felt safe with so that I could start to decrease the shame that what I'm doing is not wrong. And with people that I knew I could trust, that were safe people that were in my life at the time. And they held me with so much compassion and so much support. And so I find that a lot of these modalities all focus on self-regulation activities. What can I do in the moment when I'm feeling a binge urge, when I want to skip a meal? But what we really need is a lot more co-regulation from people, nature, animals, where we're getting the message externally from other things, you are safe to be here. Because to send that to our own nervous system when ourselves don't even feel safe to be
Right.
here, that's really hard to do.
Right. Right. Oh, that was so beautifully stated. It's landing, like it's all sort of settling as I listen. And it's really, yeah, what a gift to give people to not feel they are to blame for something that developed out of a safety, like your body wanting to protect you. Yeah, it's also, like, similar to how we have negative thoughts and sometimes they can really run the show, and at the root of it all, they're kinda just there to protect you,
Yeah.
right? And I think once that concept starts to come to light, people can start to make shifts in their way of thinking, but it's just acknowledging that, you know, they're not it's not trying to hurt you, and it's only protective because the body will only try and help itself. It's a very benevolent system.
Yes. Yes, it is. It is on your team. And that's why I find that learning how your body communicates with you, and I just like to use the outlet of food. For other people, it may be all sorts of other things, but
Sure.
because of my history and my experience, I've focused on food and body image. But when we can learn, oh, this is what my body's trying to tell me, then we're starting to address, oh, okay, let's get into like the emotional hunger piece, for example. I can start to find ways to meet my emotional hunger now knowing it's not physical hunger. So, emotional hunger, it's now utilizing the language of food because it learned to. So, if you think about how many times, if we think about anything that we repeat over and over again, one, it's what our nervous system gets to know, and that becomes home simply because we know it. And then the more we repeat something, the stronger that neural network becomes. So, every time you have thought about food, you have listened to that. And so I find with emotional hunger, it's using the language of food where it's like, you have to eat this food now. It gets your attention. So it's very sudden, it's very loud, it's very demanding, and it's very particular. It tells you a very specific food that it wants you to eat. And what I have found is that usually those food cravings are coming from sometimes memories, where I like to check in with people around what memories do you have with this food. And it's amazing how so many individuals will be like, oh, I craved, let's say, for example, a donut because like my dad, who I never got to spend time with, always took me out after school to get donuts whenever he would pick me up. And so we have this memory of like donuts are now connected to safety, co-regulation, I'm being seen, I'm being listened to, and everything gets fused with like a donut's going to give me that. Rather than it was like the context of the situation you were experiencing the donut in. But sometimes what we're tapping into in those moments when we start getting curious about why this food? Why is my body telling me and screaming at me to eat that particular food? Is that if we didn't eat that food, then we would have to tap into what's actually there. So we want to eat the donut because it's going to make us feel regulated. It's going to like our perceived idea is that it's going to make us feel calm. It's going to make us feel peaceful. It may make you feel that way, but usually what I find is when people slow down and actually eat the food in an embodied way, they're like, oh, this is not making me feel the way I thought it was going to feel. Because what is actually present is maybe you're lonely. Maybe you're feeling isolated. Maybe you're feeling sad. You're feeling a lot of anxiety. And so our body remembers through, again, that nervous system and neural network, it remembers what could make us feel the way we want to feel. But sometimes we have to pause and remember that may not make me feel this way in the context of this situation now. So that's where we have to kind of build the capacity to be with the discomfort, but also get curious about, well, what would make me feel the way I want to feel when I feel lonely and isolated and sad and anxious? You know what? Calling my best friend. Or, you know what? Actually getting outside and taking a walk in the sun. Or journaling and just kind of expressing myself or giving myself an opportunity to move my body in some nourishing way. So that's where when I'm talking about this satiated life and finding things that align with us, now we've taken the pressure off of food to be the answer to emotional hunger that will never satisfy that hunger.
So interesting. So that brings up another curiosity for me, which is it something that if we are deliberate, right, about the journaling or the nature walking or the getting some sunshine, how does that have an influence? It just in and of itself, if it's not something that you're coming to your office or your Zoom room to address, like, is it something that is a proactive space in which, it's always going to be good for you in that you're moving around or you're getting sunshine, right? There are some like biochemical and physiologic reasons why all those things are great.
Mm-hmm.
Does it have the added bonus of kind of helping with this pathway, like before you get down the road? Just, does that make sense?
Totally, yes.
Okay.
So if we see that food behaviors are potentially a response to more of that sympathetic nervous system response, every tiny little thing that you do throughout a day to start to get used to spending more time in a parasympathetic response counts. Because the other thing is that if you've lived, as I did, for decades of your life in a fight or flight response, you're not going to feel used to or safe living more of your life in safety and connection. Safety is not going to feel safe initially. It's going to feel actually anxiety producing
Yeah.
of like something must be wrong. and and you're gonna maybe like this is where I also don't believe in self-sabotage. I don't even use the word with my clients and those I work with, because in the moment what you're doing is you're trying to get yourself back into a state that you know,
Mm-hmm.
because
The
that's what
familiar.
feels home. Yes.
Yeah.
So every time you take a pause and take a deep breath, every time you take a pause and pet maybe a fur friend at home, every time you go and take a fresh breath of air, you're having these tiny little micro moments of safety. And I find that we can't do the really, really big things initially because that might feel way too overwhelming, that you're just going to go right into your familiar coping mechanisms because it's too much. Your body doesn't know how to contain that yet. So I find that, yes, it's actually very small and very incremental, where I find, some people who come to work with me, they're like, so how long is this going to take? And I'm like,
I don't
I
know.
don't know. But it's going to keep taking baby steps forward. And it's not like you're going to stay in the same place. You're going to feel really small, subtle shifts start to occur. Because if you are living more space and time in the parasympathetic nervous system throughout a day, you potentially aren't going to feel as stressed because there's something called allostatic load, so the amount of stress that our body can handle. And let's say you're constantly like decreasing that bucket throughout a day. Still may end the day pretty full, but not as full that leads you to go then lean on food. So then you feel like you have more choice in the evenings. Okay, had a stressful day, but it's not so overwhelming where I just need to collapse. Now, maybe your prefrontal cortex is still a little online. You aren't so deep into the sympathetic nervous system. Like I always see all of this on a spectrum.
Sure.
And that like you feel like, okay, I know that food actually isn't going to be it. I need to eat a nourishing dinner. And then I need to figure out what else would actually feel stabilizing and connecting with myself in the evening that may not be eating. So you feel more of that sense of choice, but it does actually start from the moment you wake up, and every tiny little thing you do matters. And I don't say that in a pressured way of like, now you have to get it all perfect because that's
Right.
gonna also just put you into
Not helpful. Right.
That's not gonna
Exactly.
be helpful either. But everything that you do for yourself, every pause that you take, even just to close your eyes before you go into a meeting and take a deep inhale with a longer exhale, which is parasympathetically activating, it all is going to make a difference.
Amazing. So, Stephanie, as we start to kind of round out our time together, I'm curious for those people listening who, you know, want to maybe address or, come to terms with what's been going on in their own lives and feel that food has been that answer for them for a long time. Um, do you have a dose of inspiration for them that you like to share with, new clients or people that you're talking with, before I have you share like how people can find you?
Yeah, so we actually started going there. And I start most people off with this somatic practice. I call them somatic pauses. I know that Deb Dana in polyvagal theory, she calls them picking up glimmers. But if you can just start to pause throughout a day, and not that we're checking in with your thoughts, but we are checking in with your embodied experience. And there are 3 different ways that you can kind of experience your body, and sometimes going internally. So that's that interoception we're talking about, may be too much. Because also there's the flip side where some of you might actually be hyper aware of every ping, every pang, everything that changes and shifts in your body. We're actually tuning in might not be the thing for you.
Yeah.
This is where it has to be individualized. So I want to give people options here of when they take this somatic pause, what they could be checking in with. For the person who wants to come in and actually feels nourishing to connect with themselves, I would pick a particular body part that feels neutral. So often when we check in, we're checking in with what feels uncomfortable. And then that can get associated with check-ins or only when I feel discomfort, rather than connecting with ourselves could be connecting with anything with ourselves. So you might connect with your earlobe or the tip of your nose or your fingertips. That is also embodiment. And it can be a very grounding, neutral experience because it's just my nose exists. And what's it like to inhabit my nose right now? So if someone wants to come internal, then there's proprioception, which is knowing our body in space. So sometimes if it's too much to go internal, we can kind of squeeze an arm, bring in some input of like, here's where my arm exists in space. And what's it like to just feel that? And that can feel very grounding because sometimes, again, when we're very stressed or in that sympathetic response, we can dissociate. We have no sense of ourselves. We're just a floating head. And just to bring in of like, hey, body, you're still here. I see you. I'm connecting with you can be very grounding. And then if making contact with your body, especially I know for a lot of individuals I work with, making contact with their body, especially in this body image, weight stigmatized world might feel like too much and not safe to do, then we go to exteroception. So
Mm.
exteroception is going through your senses and picking up your external environment. So talking about what do I smell? What do I see? What do I hear? What do I taste or feel? If that feels okay, even if it's like touching something outside of your body, like a rock on the floor. So that can also be something in a somatic pause that you're like, let me listen for the birds outside. Or let me touch a body part and notice what it's like to feel myself. Or what's happening inside of myself that I could connect with right now. So I feel like when we talk about a check-in, it's like people are like, well, what does that even mean? What am I checking in with? And there's no right way to do this. And it has to be adapted to what's going to work for you, because the whole intention of that moment is, as we've been talking about, to remind yourself of the safety of being alive. And there's a lot of different ways to experience that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that is a really important point because every one of us will have our own preferences for how we want to do a check in, or we want to just ground ourselves by feeling the fingertips, right? Like there are so many different ways to do that, and none of them are necessarily right or wrong. It's
Yes.
just a preference and it's whatever works for you, right? So, Stephanie, this has been such a beautiful hour of learning and expanding, my thoughts and, knowledge about this area. And I just want to thank you for spending the time with us at Prescribing Possibility. Can you share with the listeners how and where they can find you?
Yeah. So first you can check out my website, stephaniemara.com, and you'll find all of my links there. Also the link to my other website. So that's somaticeating.com. So if you want to learn more about my 3-month live program, I teach it live twice a year. You can get on the wait list there at somaticeating.com. I'm on every single social media platform, so you can find me everywhere. But if you're mostly on Instagram, you can find me at _ Stephanie Mara. And then, if you sign up for my newsletter on my website, you'll get a 5-day email series that walks you through some of the work that we were talking about today. So it's totally for free. You can unsubscribe if you want to after that. I really don't send out a ton of emails. Really, the emails that I often send out are updating people of when my own podcast called Satiated Podcast episodes come out. So lots of different ways to connect. And if anyone had any insights from here, please email me, support@stephaniemara.com. I'd love to hear from anyone who listened to this episode.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been a really great hour, and I hope that it serves somebody out there. And thank you for the work you do.
Thank you so much for having me. I just feel so appreciative of being able to, share all of this work here. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for sharing your time with me here on Prescribing Possibility. I hope today's conversation brought you some comfort, connection, or offered you a new perspective, maybe even just a moment of calm in the chaos. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend or a colleague. You never know who might need a little more harmony in their life today. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions, or topics you're curious about. Reach out to me on Instagram or LinkedIn at dimnawile, or you can send me an email, podcast@dimnawile.com. Until next time, give yourself the grace to grow, the space to rest, and the courage to imagine what's possible.